Hello, this video is a follow-up to a previous one on problem or project 18.1. Following the design that I discussed in 18.1 and the previous video, here is the development of this project. And I went ahead and I set up my project file in Netbeans to just save the time on the video since all of you know how to do that now. So I created a Java application project and I called it uh, last name and the problem number. And I created three packages. One package to represent my data classes, and if you go back to the other video, we had one data class called DataElement that represent the title, length, and color. Another data class that represent a data collection, which is the collection of the element and the one that knows how to add an element to the collection and how to draw the collection as a bar and a by chart. Then we have two components. I went with the design that creates two components, bar component and by component. Then I created a package called app GUI for the chart frame and the app that will launch that frame. Now, before I proceed with this, this is my design. This is one option out of many options that are available. You are free to make your own designs as long as it is modular and reusable. So for instance, some people took the data collection and combined it. Some people took bar component and by component and made it one component. That could be fine. Uh, Even combining it with the data collection, that's okay too. Um, but at least you need a data element, you need a collection and a component, and you need a frame and an app. So either you go with this option or the least option you will have a frame, an app, a component and a collection together, and an element. All right, so following this design, I'm gonna start and build these classes quickly. So we'll start with the data element class. And in the data element class, we said we have three data variables. So the first one is a title, so we call it title. And the second one was a length, so we can say that the length is an integer. And then the last one was a color, so we will say that this is a color. Color, and then we're gonna call this color. Okay, now the color will complain because means we need to import the AWT color class. Now we want to go and refactor and encapsulate a set and get method. If you go back to the video, the design we had for this class called for a set and get method for each one of them. So that's a set and get for each and every one of them. And then we want to have a constructor, and what the constructor will do is will initialize in both of them. So we can create an constructor, public data element. So this is a default constructor, and it is a good practice to always have a default constructor if you're going to create your own. And then we can say this is our constructor, and then we say the constructor that will receive three parameters: a parameter for the title, a parameter for the length, and a parameter for the color. And the color, we're gonna say we're gonna receive a string for the color, since this is what the user will enter in a text field. They will enter a string, they will not enter a color object, and then we will need to come here and pass the string and then return back a color object for us. So the constructor will be public data element, and the public data element will receive a string called the title, an integer for length, and a string for color. And what the data element will do, it will assign the string by calling set string, set title, and give it the title. It will set the length and pass the length, and it will set the color and pass the color. Now, something we will do, if you go to the set color, since we define the color to be of type color, the get color method, the set color method is receiving a color. We're gonna change that and make it a string, since we know that this method will receive a string color. And we will use the get color method to convert that string into a color. I'm trying to think here what's the best way we can do that. We can change that color to be a string so that it stays, this method works correctly, and then the get color method will not return the color but will return a color object based on what this color will be. So to do that, we have to make some assumption on what colors we are going to make available to the user. And before I proceed with this part, the reason we're doing this is that the user will enter the color as a string, and we need to convert that string into a color. The color class in the library does not have a method to do that, so we need to make that conversion ourselves. There is another way. There is a class in the library that displays the color frame, which allows the user to select whatever color they want, and that would be really where you would go with allowing the user to enter a color. So, but that will make this problem more than what it should be. So we'll just assume that the user can enter only 3 colors, and they can switch between them. You can make it more complex by adding more options of colors. So user should enter, or we can say that precondition color is either black, blue, green, and red. So in this case, I will create a set of statements, and I will say if color is equals ignore case. If the color equals black, then I would say return color dot black. Else if color dot equal ignore case blue, I'll say return color dot blue. And then another one for the other 2 colors. Return color. And then finally, if it's neither one of those, we'll return color dot red. Okay, so that's our data element class. Notice the change here is that in the data element, because of the simplicity of the way we're reading from the user color and the way we want to specify an actual color, we made the color object as an attribute. We made it a string, and the set method is working fine, but the get method is returning a color, is not returning a string. Right? You don't have to do it this way. This is just one of many ways to do this issue. Okay, so that's our data element class. Then we move on to the data collection class. And in the data collection class, we are using an array list to represent a collection of data elements. And we can call it elements. And of course, we have to import the utility. And as with every variable, class variable, we want to encapsulate the fields. So we select and refactor. Looking back into the design or the analysis we made, this class needs a constructor. So we go with a default constructor, and we say public data collection. And what the default constructor will do is to initialize elements. So we say elements equal new array list data element, and this is a method call to the constructor. So we're specifying here, we're creating a new object of type array list, which is a custom type available in the library, where each element of the array list is of type data element, and that is the constructor, default constructor. And if you go to the API documentation for array list, you see that the default constructor creates 10 elements, a size of 10 for, and then waits for the data to be filled. Then we also can take, I think that's all what we need here. Then we need an add method. The add method adds an element to the collection. It also receives a parameter, and the parameter is type data element. So we say public void add, and the add method will receive a parameter called data element, and we can say this is E. And what we want to do with this is to add it to the elements. So elements.add E. So now when the user enter the label, the title, and so on, we're gonna need to call this add method and pass it the element that encapsulates these three values that the user will add. The other method that we need to add here is a method to draw the bar chart. So drawBar, and this method needs to receive a parameter that represents the graphics 2G context, graphics 2D canvas to draw on, which the canvas here will be the frame which is passed on to the component through the paint component method, and that's where the paint component method will grab that graphics G object and pass it on to the draw. So public void drawBar. And drawing a bar chart is interesting, and there is an example in chapter 18 that tries to discuss with you how you go about drawing a bar chart. We have done this in class when we covered the drawing the when we covered drawing the midterm, and we have done that also in when I discussed how we can go about drawing the pie chart. So let's review this very quickly here. So we are going to try to draw a bar chart. So the bar chart will have an X and Y, and then each color will represent a bar. So that will represent one bar, then another bar, then a third one, okay. Now the thinking here is that how can you go about drawing each one of those? So those, and you probably notice each one of those is really a rectangle. To draw these rectangles vertical like this, we just want to make sure that they all start from the bottom here the same. You may say, well, I'm going to start them from the top and draw them going down, or draw them going horizontally. All of this will work fine. On the component, the frame or the canvas in which this will be drawn, which will be like this. The top left corner is 0.00, and the x-axis goes in this way and the y goes that way. So to draw these diagrams and drawing the rectangle, if you want to draw a rectangle, the rectangle requires 4 data. It requires what I would call x1 and y1. It requires the height, and it requires the width. So this one is the same. This will be height 2, and this will be x2 and y2, and this will be width, and this will be x3, y3, and this will be height, and this will be width. Now, for all the collection elements that we draw, so that we are going to use, the length can be the height. So we can say the height will represent the length of each element. Okay? And this is how we're going to compare between each of the 3 elements. So then the question that remains is, what value should we use for W, and what value should we use for the x's and the y's? Great. The W can be constant. So we can assume, let's say we're going to use 10 for the W. So all of them will be 10. The distance between them, this also we need to figure it out. We can specify those as specific values like this, or we can say, well, let's go ahead and do it relative to the general width of the component. So if this is the general width of the component and this is the height of the component, why don't we get the width and the height of the component, and based on the width and height we calculate this. What do we mean by this? So x1, we can say that the first one, maybe to start with, we need to figure out how many we are going to draw. So we can divide the width divided by how many we're going to draw, which will be the count of the collection. So this will give us how many we're going to draw. And we can say that this will give us if we divide this over 5, so it will give us, if we're going to draw 3, it will divide this into 3 pieces, or 4 or 5 pieces, or something like that. So we say x1 is an initial value, and then we add to it the W, and we add to it another distance here, maybe it's another W, so we get x2. So x2 will be x1 plus 2W. Then y2, and then we can continue and say x3 is x2 plus 2W. So every x equal the x before it plus 2 multiplied by the W, or by that distance. Then maybe we can say if this will be W, 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 another one here, and this one, and then another one here. So to draw 3 elements, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, which is 2 multiplied by 3 plus 1. And so for 3 elements, if we take 2 multiplied by the count plus 1 and divide the width over that, over how many these are, it will give us a value for what each this W should be. So we can say here that this W, the small w, is the width of the frame divided by 2 multiplied by the count plus 1. Okay, if my math is wrong, then when we start programming, it's not going to look right, so we can fix it at that time. So that will give us the x1, the y1. The y1 will be the height. So the height minus h1, that's the y1. The y2, the height minus y2, minus the height 2 will give us y2. Because y2 is that distance. This is y2, which is this height minus the length, and y3. So each y, we can write it here. The y equal the frame height minus the length of each element. That give you the y of that element. So you get the x, which is this one. You calculate the w, then you calculate each x. So this is the current x equal to we can actually try to see. So this x is 1w, 1w, that give you the first x. The second x is 3w's. The third x is 4w's. So it's always 1 plus the index, how many w's that you add together for the x, and then and that's all what we need to do. This might be a little bit confusing to you, but if you think about it, you will understand it. If you don't understand it, then you can use some constants. That will work fine. All what we're doing here is just making it dependent on the independent of the or relative to the width and the height of the frame. All right, so let's get this out of here. Get back to this. So drawing the bar, we'll start by get the width and height. So how do we get the width and height? We can pass them to the drawBar. So drawBar need to receive graphics 2D, and it needs the graphics 2D, and we can call it G2. It also needs to receive an integer that represents the frame width. We can call it width, and an integer that represents the height. Oops. So we get, so we have the height and the width. So we start by calculating the W, which represent the distance among the bars. So I would say integer W, and W will equal the width of the frame divided by 2 multiplied by elements dot size plus 1. Okay. Now this is a division that could have a decimal point, and if it has a decimal point and all the elements are integer, the decimal point will be ignored. So we need to make that division decimal division, and we can do this by casting any of those in a float number. But then we have to make this, we can make the 2, we can say 2.0, and this will say, well, but you have now a double and you have to cast the double into integer. You have to do that. Uh, you have to force the casting. So we can say math dot round, and the round will round this double into the highest value, and then you can cast that into integer. The purpose of math.double.round is to round the decimal point. So if you get, like, for instance, 25.7, it becomes 26, and so on. Now that we got this, we can start by the calculating or the deciding what x is. So we can say for data element e in elements. This is the for loop to loop through a collection. And for each element of the collection, we need to calculate the x. So we can say integer x equal. And we said that the x equal the index of the elements. And I don't have the index here because I didn't go through the index. So maybe if I am interested in the index, maybe I should not use this array. Maybe I can use for, and I can say integer I equal 0, I less than elements dot size, and I plus plus. So x will equal the I plus 1 multiplied by w, and the y will equal the height minus the length. So to get the length, we need to get the element. So now if we use this loop, we need to get the element. So I can say data elements e equal elements dot get element at I. What this does, it does similar to the other loop that I was going to use, but says get me the element, and it retrieves the element. So this will be the height minus e dot get length. So the height minus length, that is the y. And then we need the width of the, which will be the w, and we need the and the height, which will be the length. So in this case, I can go ahead and say g2 dot draw apparently we did not import the graphics too. Oh, it added a class. So I did something without noticing here. So let's delete this. So what I did when the class importing, it asked me if I want to add a class called the G2, or if I want to import graphics. I misspelled it. It's graphics 2D. If you want to import or create a class, and I clicked on create a class, but I need to import G2. So G2 dot draw rectangle, and we'll draw rectangle, and the x will be x, the y will be y, and then the width will be w, and the height will be e dot get length. And we need to draw this in the color. So before I draw, I say g2 dot set color, and I use the e dot get color. Right? So this is the drawBar method, and I will stop here, and in the next video we'll continue with this class and add the drawPy. Then we move on to the components and to the frame. Thank you.